A U.S. federal appeals court has refused to reinstate President Donald Trump's travel ban. The court's judges maintained that the ban specifically targets Muslims, adding that it raises serious constitutional issues. Now, Trump signed the immigration order in January, and it banned refugees and people from 7 majority Muslim countries from entering the United States. But the legal battle is now far from over. The White House says it's likely to take the court to the Supreme Court. Well, the Washington State Attorney Bob Ferguson was a leading figure behind the lawsuit. He celebrated the ruling as a victory for the rule of law.
We are a nation of laws. And as I have said, as we have said from day one, that those laws apply to everybody in our country. And that includes the President of the United States. Look, we respect that the President has broad authority when it comes to issuing executive orders, but they still have to follow the Constitution.
Well, we'll take you to Washington for the reaction from there in a moment, but first to our journalist, correspondent Rachel Silverman, who's in San Francisco for us. Rachel, good to speak to you again. So just take us through the decision. What arguments were made and why did the judges rule the way they did?
Well, the decision was a total repudiation of President Trump's case, and it prevents the reinstatement of the president's executive order that had suspended travel from 7 predominantly Muslim countries and limited the nation's refugee program. The judges said both sides had made compelling cases, but they came down firmly on the side of the lawyers for the 2 states, Washington and Minnesota, who challenged the ban along with allies who included practically every major technology company in the United States. They say the ban was motivated by religious discrimination, that it endangered rather than enhanced the nation's safety by creating chaos at the airports and by playing into the hands of extremists who want to portray the U.S. as Islamophobic. They also argued that the ban has threatened the economy and caused hardships for people living here with ties to the 7 countries. Now, in response to the government's argument, the judges said, on the one hand, the public has a powerful interest in national security and in the ability of an elected president to enact policies. But they flatly rejected the government's argument that the suspension of the order should be lifted immediately for national security reasons. They said there was no evidence that any alien from any of the countries named in the order had committed a terror act in the United States, and they forcefully asserted their ability to serve as a check on the president's power. Molly?
Rachel, as quick as you can, please. Now, does this come as any surprise? And just explain to us how this court is known as being liberal. In a quirk of the U.S. system, courts can be liberal or conservative.
Well, it is a liberal court. You know, judges are appointed. These judges, federal judges, are appointed by presidents, and this is a liberal part of the country. But the decision was unanimous. There were 3 judges on this emergency panel, 2 of them appointed by Democrats, 1 by a Republican. So no one can really say that the decision came down along political lines.
Okay, Rachel,
Back
for now
to you.
In San Fran, thank you very much. Well, to Washington, D.C., where Harry's Horton is waiting for us. Hello to you, Harry. So where do we go next with this?
Well, this will more than likely end up in the Supreme Court now. Donald Trump has already said that he intends to appeal against this decision. And the next court up, the next higher court up is the Supreme Court, which currently is in a political deadlock. There are 4 conservative judges and 4 liberal judges on the Supreme Court. There is 1 vacancy at the moment. Donald Trump has nominated Judge Neil Gorsuch to fill that vacancy. So Democrats are going to try and make this as difficult as possible, his confirmation process. They want to dig their heels in to make this politically embarrassing for the Trump administration and ensure that when this court hearing does reach the Supreme Court, it remains in a 4-4 deadlock. And that means that the court more than likely will stick with the current ruling, i.e. the temporary halt on this travel ban will remain in place. At the moment, that is the situation. People with visas from those 7 Muslim majority countries can still travel to the United States, and indeed at airports across the country, that's what many of them are doing tonight.
Of course, Harry, he could rescind this order and put in a new one that's worded correctly to get around the courts. But what political costs have there been for the Trump administration? And it's worth remembering, of course, we're only 2 weeks in and already had such a constitutional crisis.
Absolutely. Well, this was Donald Trump's most controversial and ambitious campaign pledge. It really was one that resonated with his base. But it clearly hasn't worked out. So the political embarrassment for him is quite large at this stage. This is being discussed right across all the TV networks here in the United States. It will be front page of all the newspapers tomorrow. I think for some Republicans up on Capitol Hill in Congress, they'll be slightly frustrated that they weren't involved more in the discussions for helping to come up with this policy. They'll be frustrated that they were kept out of the loop. Many of them have been pretty silent tonight in reaction to this court ruling, and that's quite telling, I think, about the way they feel this Trump White House is quite distant from the Republican establishment. So a real challenge for Donald Trump now to try and regain some sort of authority when it comes to his immigration policies. He's trying very hard to keep the public on side, talking about the threat to national security that he believes currently exists at the moment. But certainly the actions in Washington, D.C. on Thursday night dealt a pretty significant political blow to Donald Trump in just under 3 weeks into his young presidency.
And finally then, Harry, there is being reported that there has been a phone call held between Donald Trump and Xi Jinping of China. Of course, there were some harsh words from Mr. Trump for the Chinese government during the campaign. What detail can you bring us about that phone call?
Well, it was reported that President Xi Jinping of China was holding off talking to Donald Trump until he would formally recognise the One China policy. It's a long-standing US policy that states that the United States will only have formal diplomatic ties with Beijing and not with Taiwan, that Beijing views as a breakaway state. So in a phone call late on Thursday night between President Xi Jinping and President Donald Trump, the White House says that President Trump agreed at the request of President Xi to honour the One China policy. It said that the phone call between the two of them was extremely cordial and they extended invitations to meet in their respective countries. So perhaps a backing down of sorts by Donald Trump, but an indication that relations between the two countries may begin to thaw slightly.
OK, thank you for now, Harry.